Enlightened investors, I have some exciting news for those looking to dive into the world of passive real estate investing. Many have asked how I got my start in commercial real estate investing. Well, it all began with an event close to my heart. Multifamily Live is back, and this time it's online. This event holds a special place for me because it's where I got my start in commercial real estate investing. Imagine a virtual gathering where you can gain invaluable insights into how cash flow ready apartment buildings are the key to your passive income journey. Take the mystery out of passive real estate investing and step into the active side of the equation to gain a comprehensive understanding so you can invest passively with confidence. Whether you're a newbie or a seasoned investor, Multifamily Live is designed to cover everything from acquisition to asset management. You can be confident that you'll leave this event with a comprehensive understanding of commercial investing. Mark your calendars for May 9th to May 11th. Trust me, this is an event you won't want to miss. Ready to enhance those passive streams of income? Get your ticket now, and together, let's take the next step to enhance our financial well-being, to live abundantly and flourish in all areas of life. I'll see you in Multifamily Live. Hello, enlightened investors. Welcome back to Real Estate Investing Abundance. I'm your host, Dr. Allen, and I'm so delighted that you are here with us today as we have an extra special treat with us. Dave Holman, who has been a guest with us before, is back with us, and we're going to be talking about extra cash with green building, amongst other things. And Dave is a triple threat syndicator, realtor, and property manager. He's from Maine, has 300 units, and has written 2 books. He loves green building and working with immigrants. So Dave, welcome back to the show. So glad you're with us. And just take us into the show and just give us a little background as to what you're talking about when you're talking about green and also working with immigrants.
Absolutely. First, thanks for having me, Alan. I really appreciate it. And first thing is, those two topics sometimes conjure up political sentiments in people, and I want to talk about them in a sort of unbiased business sort of mindset. So we can come from the right, left, center, up, down, backward, sideways, whatever you want, and I think they make sense in all those different directions. I'm the great grandchild of immigrants from Ukraine, and it's an honor to be here in this great country where we have the rule of law, which helps us invest in real estate, which I've traveled a lot of the world. And that's one of the big barriers is that, land invasions happen. People don't have title to their property. And that's why a lot of people want to come here or to Europe or places where you can, by the sweat of your brow, make enough money to own your own home. And that dream of home ownership is something that, really gratifies me to see renters navigate this course of like barely making it into rental units to really succeeding in rental units. I don't mind saying goodbye to them when they move off to buy their own places and continue that journey and hopefully are leaving us rave reviews on the way. So, it's really gratifying to work with immigrants. One of the surprising things is, you can find funding for rent from a lot of different places, and, different municipalities, different states have that funding available, and it's often short term. So you might be, as a landlord, providing a 12-month or 18-month, shelter for someone to get on their feet. And to me, that's a great thing to do because, you're not a permanent, subsidy. You're a temporary help to get them out of a homeless shelter, off a street, kids into school, and a lot of times when we do this, it's seeing the kids really thrive is what makes it so worthwhile. Because they're innocent. They don't know why they're here, what's going on. And they just know that they now have a home when they didn't before. And if you can both see that, do that, and profit from that in an ethical way, I don't see a downside. I really don't. It's a great thing to do. And then on top of that, historically, we have not built our buildings in the most, let's say, scientific or energy efficient way. And as a landlord, our biggest expenses are usually, taxes and utilities. And it's the utilities part that I attack with green energy. And if you could save money in the long run, because I'm a buy and hold investor, I'm not a flipper. Flipping, you might not care very much about that unless you think you could get an extra buck, for that investment. Whereas as a long-term buy and hold, owner, if I can save 10 or 20% or 30% of my utility bills over time, that translates to big time value. And the bigger the asset, the more value that drives. If you can get a higher NOI, a net operating income, by reducing your energy use through things like insulation, that is the least sexy and the most important thing to think about. And it applies in almost any climate in this country, hot or cold. If your building is not well insulated, if you're cooling it, the heat's going to get right in and take your cooling right out. And if you're heating it, the same thing's going to happen if it's not well insulated. And insulation is cheap. It's cheap. It's just cellulose. It's old newspaper covered in boric acid thrown up in an attic, blown in. It's not rocket science. That's one of the biggest secrets that I want to tell, your viewers and listeners, is that look at the insulation of your building, especially if it was built more than 30 years ago. Buildings built, in the 80s or prior, you're going to have this, crumpled up old pink fiberglass insulation up there. If you're lucky, you probably got mice and rats living in it. You may not have a great scene going on up there in your attic. And that is a great place to open up that hatch, pop your head into. If you don't have a hatch, create one. We've encountered that before. See what's going on up there, because that attic could be costing you a lot of money as an owner, and that's your bank account. So, think first about the attic in terms of green energy. Solar panels is not tip number one. That's like number 11, on the list of green improvements, and it can be a great one, especially in new construction or bigger projects. But look at the basic stuff of just air sealing, insulation, things like that. And especially if the owner is paying the heating bill in a multifamily building, for instance, if there's a central, cooling unit or central boiler, you're paying that bill. Yeah, you want to look at where that energy is going. And that also, relates to resident education. I hate seeing open windows in February in Maine. That burns me, because that strikes to that's management problem. You're not managing the folks in there properly, because obviously someone's got the temperature cranked up to 80, and then maybe the unit above them's too hot, so they open a window. And you can fix that with a polite discussion and some good firm rules usually, and that'll save you a lot of money. So those are some basics of those two topics, I would say.
Neil Bawa has been on my program, and he has talked about this issue of green energy, and also he says the same thing you say, that it isn't a political issue. And if you don't believe that, just look at what the World Bank and the IMF are doing, and they're planning years ahead for climate change. They believe it, whether you do or not. The World Bank and the IMF and the insurance companies are preparing for climate change. And what Neil says, if you're not preparing for that, you're going to lose out.
I completely agree. And that gets to that if you look at real estate investing through the lens of climate change, it is a totally different lens than what a lot of the hype has been talking about for the past 10 years. All of a sudden, the Sun Belt is less attractive, because when you crank up that thermostat another 10, 20 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, that's not a good place to live.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be comfortable in 120, 130 degree heat. And, we can build for that. We can help that. I'm not proposing that we depopulate Phoenix or something, abandon Miami, but these are areas where the mitigation of climate change over the next 50 years is going to be profound. And I do think that there's a lot of opportunities in the Rocky Mountain states, in the upper Midwest, in the Northeast, in places that have got a good amount of elevation up above sea level. I would say anywhere under 10 feet, wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. It's going to be underwater, not maybe every day, but it's going to get, storm surges. It's going to get inundated with increasing rapidity. And when you look at the map of the Gulf Coast, I mean, it's really scary. It implies major problems in the next generations. And, today, sure, no big deal. Live right by the coast at 1 or 2 feet elevation, rebuild after the storms. But, as that starts happening with increasing rapidity, there's not an insurance company on the planet that's gonna touch those areas. And it's gonna be only the ultra wealthy and ultra poor, kind of clinging on to them, one for want and one for need, which is not a good situation. So, plan for that. And what we're already seeing in Maine, I mean, as a realtor, as an investor, I have had clients, I have had tenants who have come here with our climate in mind. It's a quality of life issue. It's like, wow, you don't get over 100 in the summer. I can go to Florida in the winter. These are really, wonderful places for a good part of the year, and they're positioned to benefit as the thermostat gets cranked up and as the sea levels rise. So that's what I would think about, is where, it's like Wayne Gretzky said, look where the puck's gonna be, and I'm paraphrasing, but look where the climate's gonna be. Don't think about what it is today, where the South and Southwest are delightful. Think about where it's going to be in 10 or 20 years, when every single year is probably going to be the hottest year on record. And, we traveled in Europe 2 summers ago. There were heat waves and wildfires. That's scary stuff. And they're happening here too. It's scary stuff. I mean, heat kills a lot of people. And so as an owner of real estate, one of the things I think about is converting these units from, in Maine, they just provided heating, no AC. And tenants would put in these window units. They'd leak down on the units below them. That causes rot and mold and damage, and they're not energy efficient, and they're a drag. Then they leave them in all winter, and the air is escaping out through the window. I mean, there's all kinds of issues with the tiny window unit AC. If you can put in a heat pump in that unit, it'll cool the whole unit. One head usually is enough to do a whole unit. If it's a really big unit, 1,000 square feet or more, maybe 2. But those things are incredibly energy efficient. They're about 3 times more efficient than electric, baseboard or resistance heating. Electric got a bad name, in the 70s when electric prices went way up. Now I think it's a perfectly viable strategy, especially with heat pumps, and even for putting in some baseboard, which I do in disconnected rooms. I'd rather put in a $200 or $300 strip of baseboard than a $5,000 heat pump. If that's something where just opening the door would allow the resident to keep the temperature, very similar to what they've got it set at the head. So a lot of states have good incentives for those. I mean, Maine is a particularly wonderful state for that. We've had a greenhouse gas carbon trading deal for over a decade that's been funding what's called Efficiency Maine, which provides rebates and incentives. And we've gotten tens of thousands of dollars of rebates. I mean, the new construction building we're working on now, 63 units, we're getting $200,000 of incentives to put in what's called a VRF heat pump system, which is an ultra high-tech energy efficient system where, one condenser unit is powering about 10 different resident units, and each one of them can be on a different setting. One can be on heat, one can be on cool, one can be on dehumidify. You've got all the options there. And that is kind of the energy of the future. Norway is already over 50% heat pumps. They're a cold climate in the winter. And I think that's where, the top half of the US is going for heating, and the bottom half is going for cooling, because it's a new technology that's very efficient, makes a lot of sense. And it's overcoming any controversy of subsidy and that kind of thing, because it is a better technology, and those tend to win out over time. The horse and buggy did not survive the car, and I don't think the oil and gas boilers are going to survive the heat pump.
I totally agree. Well, we are talking today with Dave Holman. He is an expert in green energy and in working with immigrants in terms of providing housing. You can find Dave at Holman Homes, and that is HOLMANHOMES.com. Well, Dave, let's talk about the work that you are doing and have been doing for the last number of years in conjunction with immigrants. And How did
Sure.
that get started? Really, what was the motivation behind that?
Yeah. You know, I come from a family of immigrants, and I think most people, unless you're Native American, you've got to say the same. And this country is built on immigrants. You know, that the names of my great grandparents are at Ellis Island on my father's side, and my mother's side were, here during the Revolutionary War, but they weren't here before Columbus, I'll tell you that. So, we have a history of people coming to North America from away, and I think that's a great tradition, that should be honored and respected. And I do that as a landlord. I like helping people that are hardworking and help themselves. What I don't like is people that aren't motivated and can't follow the rules. And just because someone's an immigrant doesn't mean they're a tenant I'm going to keep. So I want to make that clear, that I'm not an all come, blanket kind of handout kind of guy. We watch, and we look, and we help the folks that really deserve help, and try hard and follow the rules. And we do not renew leases, and we try to avoid contact with tenants, be they longtime, U.S. citizens or immigrants, if they're going to be a headache, basically. So that's step number one. It all started when Portland, Maine, experienced an influx of refugees from Africa in 2019. And they were coming in unprecedented numbers by the busload, because word had kind of gotten out that this was a pretty welcoming place to come. And you wouldn't think that someone from a very hot climate would beeline it straight up to Maine. But, there's things more important than, whether you can wear short sleeves all year long. And they were finding good schools, good resources here. And there were, Somali American families that had settled here in the 90s and now really, made it, had jobs, citizenship, all the rest of it, even hold elected office. So, it's a community that's pretty well established. But it was overwhelming the city services, and they converted the local basketball stadium to a shelter, basically, as an emergency measure, because people were just piling up on the streets, and they had nowhere to go. And this is a major problem, that needs to be dealt with on a national level. This is not a state or even city, capable problem, but that's a story for another day and another podcast. So, I contacted the city when I had a vacancy and said, hey, I have a vacancy as a landlord, and I know you guys have 200 or 300 people that need homes. If there's any way that they could pay their rent or get their rent paid somehow in the future, I'm willing to waive, the usual credit and income checks, and just, take a family, in this unit, because it was a basic unit. This was not a, granite countertop, new construction kind of place where I could get top dollar. This was a C to B class unit that was built in the 1700s, because we have those in Maine. And it's, the last renovation was probably in the 80s, and, it was clean and safe, but it wasn't fancy. We'll say that. And they actually, passed me to a couple people and said, yeah, we do. And it's not from the group that just arrived in the Expo Stadium, who don't have any documentation. We have a different family, who's in the family shelter, who arrived, legally, as part of, legal immigration. They were from Rwanda, and they've got their green cards, so they can come and work from day one, but they're homeless. I mean, they just showed up and are here to, work, but they're, educated people. The guy had gotten a master's degree already. He spoke some English, and they had a little child, and they had a second one while they were with us. They moved in. We actually moved another family in across from them. And that's kind of nice when you're able to get two folks, from one area, be it, Ukraine or Afghanistan or Rwanda, to be in the same building. It helps them a lot to have a little bit of a network. One, maybe adult can babysit all the kids while the other adults are out working. And, it can really work well in that regard. And hey, you want them working, because they're paying your rent. That you don't want to stand in their way of that. As soon as they can get off any kind of subsidy and get out in the workforce, that's great. And before you knew it, these two adults from Rwanda had 3.5 jobs between them full time. I mean, they were working nights, they were working weekends. I mean, they were hustling. They were working at a car wash. They were cleaning in the dish room. They were doing all the things that our rapidly aging country, and Maine is the oldest state. Our average age is 43. We need strong, able-bodied laborers, but, please. It's a major crisis, especially in the summers, when we're essentially importing visa labor from Eastern Europe and all over the place. So this was great. And they made it. They soon he bought a car before he even had his driver's license, and it was just sitting there in the parking lot. We helped him go and get lessons and training. He went out and got his license. Before you knew it, in 2.5 years, this family, I was their real estate buyer agent looking not for a single family home, for a multifamily building. And we had some false starts. It was hard to get financing. But they found it, and they bought a 3-unit building, in a nearby town of Bath, Maine. And they're a landlord. 3 years after arriving with a suitcase and no money, hard work, they're a landlord. And they paid their rent the whole way. So, to me, that is the ultimate like American dream success story that I think landlords, property managers, real estate investors across the country can look to and say, yeah, like this is great. This is fine. And I'm fine. We've done that for American families too. We took a family that was living in a hotel because they were homeless. The guy had a criminal record, but we looked at it and said, what was the reason for this? This is not a violent crime. The wife and the family was working, a steady, they were both working, and we got to know them a little bit and got comfortable with their personalities. We're able to put them, into a unit as well. Their kids did great in schools, and it allowed them to get back into the real estate market and get a home. We kept them for 2 or 3 years, moved on after that, renovated the unit, because again, these are not families that are going to be a good fit for your higher end rental units, usually, unless you can figure out a way to make those numbers work. Usually this is a, C-class situation, but if you want to put them in that unit, often, a slightly lower rent for a year is better than 1 or 2 months of vacancy as you look for, the full rent of tenants. If you're only losing 50 or $100 per month on a lower rent, and your rent is over $1,200, 1 month of vacancy is a year of lower rent. So that's something to think about too, is that I would rather put, a good fit in a unit for, quickly than find the perfect fit and take 2 or 3 months doing it. But it's a balance. You don't want to put in folks that are going to create behavioral problems, damage the unit. That can quickly become an expensive headache. So I think the screening process for anyone is really important. And when we're taking, new Americans, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, one of the most critical things is that they be attached to a program and a social worker that is going to take responsibility for them. And we almost make that social worker like part of our company. It's like, hey, you take the calls, you do the translation, you need to deal with this. We're making you like a co-tenant with these, immigrants because they don't speak English. We don't speak Angolan. This is a real language barrier. We need your help to make this successful. And we can, post notes in, Portuguese, French, English. Usually they'll have a language like that, as well, that is, an international language that, one of our staff can speak or at least easily translate to. But you always want to look for extra resources to help out for any kind of tenants, because ultimately you as the landlord, if you just kind of ignore them and let them do their own thing and hope that it works out, it might not. Whereas if you're kind of guiding them to the resources they need to be successful, the resources they need to be a good tenant, that's really key. And your units will be left in much better condition. It's a huge education process to take someone who has lived in a completely different culture and country in different circumstances where they might have flushed things down a toilet that you don't flush here to, teach them what to do. And that's an educational process, but it's a really rewarding one. It's not a terribly hard one usually. And once you get it going, we have buildings where we've got over 70 immigrants. It's a 16-unit building, 3-bedroom apartments, and it's working incredibly well. I mean, it's one of our best cash flowing properties. We're getting a great rent, for each of those units. And, people are now with the program. We started with that building, and it was, a slumlord special that we were inheriting it from the prior owners. I mean, it was really bad. People were throwing garbage out of their windows. There were, mice, rats, cockroaches, you name it. And, you have to kind of show people that you're different. You come in as the kind of new sheriff in town. You've got to meet them, talk with them in their apartments, at their kitchen tables, explain your goals, what you're trying to do, and prove it. Because anyone who's lived with a bad owner or bad manager in the history, they're going to be very skeptical that the new guy is any different, and that is a kind of fun challenge. I like a challenge, and it's like, all right, we're going to prove to you that we are different. We're going to invest in this building. We're going to maintain it, and we're not going to give up as soon as the first setback occurs. I mean, we're going to keep going. And, it's important to come into these buildings eyes wide open with a bit of a war chest of capital to make it what it should be, because that's part of what slumlords do is they have no capital. They're using it all. They're just extracting and only putting stuff in when, they're forced to, essentially. So by investing in your buildings long term, you're driving the asset value. And at the end of the day, that's what you're selling. That's what you own. It's not, the day-to-day, month-to-month rent, even. It's the asset value that we're trying to maximize over the life of these investments, which for us is often 10 plus years, 5 or 10 plus years that we see as a good time of ownership. When you're still getting depreciation, you can still move the needle, but you're not flipping and you're not as dependent on rates and, the macro climate. We can wait, we can cash flow. That's our plan. If things get bad, we're just going to sit back and, operate. We may not be acquiring much new. Like we only, acquired one new property in 2023 when we were doing 3 or 4 a year, before that. So you have to be nimble and be responsive to the environment you're playing in and focus on operations. But there's always a good deal to be had in any place, in any climate. You just have to do the hard work of finding it.
Enlightened investors, if you haven't done so already, be sure and click that like button and also click that share so others can take advantage of the content. And finally, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our upcoming episodes. Well, we are talking today with Dave Holman of holmanhomes.com. That's HOLMANHOMES.com. And Dave is a successful and very forward-looking landlord who invests to buy and hold, not to flip and reap short-term benefits. He's been extraordinarily successful in working with greening up his properties to increase the bottom line, and has also been fabulously successful with working with immigrants. And Dave, I really appreciate the stories that you have shared with us. They're not surprising stories to me. I hear these stories all the time in regards to immigrants and how industrious they are and how successful they can actually be when someone takes time to actually reach out and give them a helping hand. And in spite of the US myth that we're all self-made millionaires, no such thing ever exists. Everybody needs a hand up. Well, we've covered a lot of things, and you talked about the fact that when you started working with immigrants, you went to the city and you said, well, I'll do away with all of the background screening and so on and so forth. And yet you're doing screening because you don't take just anybody. So you're not relying upon the traditional screening method. So what is it that you're doing in terms of screening?
Yeah, when it comes to, people that are new to this country that don't have a credit history, background check would be useless. They don't have an income. These are the things you would normally screen for, that fair housing laws let you discriminate based on.
Exactly.
We work with programs and people that administer those programs. So, and there's a great variety of them. We work with programs that help disabled veterans to find housing. We work with like the Jewish aid programs. We work with Catholic aid programs. We work with, refugee-based programs, city-based programs. So we have a whole variety of programs that we work with, and we've, left some programs when they didn't hold up their end of the bargain. If they say that they're going to cover the security deposit and first 2 months rent, and then we're left hanging out to dry, like, nope, sorry. Like, there's a long line of people that we could help here. And if you don't have your, what together, we do. And we need to work with other people that do, So that would be the key, as I see it. Is it's very difficult to go directly to the new immigrants, to the individuals, work through a church, work through a government agency, work through a nonprofit organization that is already spending dozens of hours with these families on the ground, in the shelter or place where they are now, that knows them well and can, because they'll know which families are going to be a successful placement and which might not, and that's really key, is that they help you decide who's the right fit for this unit. And then B, that they have some resources. You always want a case manager that's going to come with these folks, because that can really mean the difference between success and failure for folks that either don't speak the language, or they have, mental health disability, or, things like that do not honestly make them the most ideal tenants. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat. It is easier to not work with disabled veterans. Sure, that's a lot easier, but there's a lot of reward for when you do. And, they can get their rent paid by the VA and things like that. That is helpful. When the chips are down and, market rate tenants are missing payments, the VA ain't going to miss any payments. I tell you that. So, there are financial and sort of ethical reasons to do it. But it's not for everyone. But for us, and it's not all our units. I would say probably we're doing this in maybe a quarter of our total unit count. So if we have 300 units, this is probably 60 or 70 of our units total, maybe less. So it's, again, I don't have the exact figures, and every day, we're having move-ins and move-outs and things like that. So, we're looking at each building, and each unit to find the appropriate fit. And a lot of times, like if a program is going to pay based on family members or based on bedrooms, you might not want to put a single person in a 2-bedroom unit, because you're only going to get, $900 a month for that. Whereas the family of 4 in a 2-bedroom unit, you might get $1,600, and that's close enough to a market rate, and it's guaranteed income. And, there's a lot of reasons you might like that. So you've got to learn the programs and learn the rules of how these things work. I mean, and, for me, it's building a great team. I don't have the skill set, patience, and time to do this as well as our managers do. And we have one particular manager, Erin Mangalam. She is an expert at working with these different programs, at working, with immigrants and refugees. She enjoys it. She thrives on it. For a lot of other managers, they'd be pulling their hair out, and so forth. And so you got to find the people who really get a reward from seeing this be successful and aren't just financially motivated. And that has, and if you do that, ironically, it's like this jujitsu move, then the financial success comes. So that's been really key for us, is trying to, find the right people on the program side, who find the right people on the tenant side, and making sure that we have the right people on the management side. And when you do all of that, you can overcome almost any challenge. If you got the right people and they're all motivated, you're going to find a way. There's always a way.
Yeah. People are so important, and organization is so important. And those internal relationships are absolutely key to the success of any successful organization. So when we first started here, I was thinking that you were probably working directly with the immigrants, but what I understand is that you really are focusing upon developing relationships with the organizations that are already there in place and working with the tenants. And so it's really kind of an indirect relationship in conjunction with that. Although when they move into your units, then it becomes a very personal one-on-one relationship with the tenant. The other thing that I think when we first started talking, I'm thinking that Portland must have some exceptional programs. But as we've gone into the conversation, I'm suspecting that you're not just working with governmental organizations, you're working with all sorts of charitable organizations and churches and organizations that are probably in place in almost every community of any significant size of 60 to 70,000 population anyway, and those organizations have always been there, and they're looking for places to help place these outcast tenants. Essentially is what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. We work a lot with the Section 8 program. Some landlords are like, wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, da da da. And yeah, hey, you're missing out on a lot of good tenants and guaranteed rent. But, again, part of the reason they do that is I think it's true to say that you'll have more issues among that population overall than you might in the, high credit score, white collar renter population. But the difference is that the Section 8 issues that you're going to find are a lot easier to deal with, whereas the white collar people are going to take you to court and sue you. So, pick your poison in that regard. But yes, I think working with programs, building relationships with the staff of those programs has been key. Our 16 unit building in Portland that pretty much only works with refugees. We have a great relationship with the staff at the Portland Family Shelter, which is a very well-run organization. They can, it's a very sort of good symbiotic relationship where they can kind of figure out the families that are ready and able to move out of the shelter and be successful as renters, give them to us. They might get 6 to 12 months of GA, general assistance support from the city, which in an urban core is going to be a pretty high rate. We're getting a very good rent. We're getting, I think it's about $2,300, per family per unit in these 3-bedroom units, and that's not much less than we would make in market rate units. And these units were built as labor housing. I mean, their kitchens are like the size of most people's walk-in closets. It's really, you almost have to turn sideways to get through this galley kitchen. And that's not going to be a great market rate unit anytime in the foreseeable future. So, it's a good logical fit in a physical way. It's right downtown. It's walkable to everything. How much parking do we offer these tenants? 0 spots for like 75 people. They don't need parking. They don't have cars. It's fine. So there's a lot of reasons why this property, is a good fit, and people can look around in that context and find what's a good fit. If this had been a new construction thing with nice big kitchens and everything else, this might not have worked, and so you don't try to fit a square peg in a round hole. I think you have to figure out the right fit in these regards. But when you do, it can be really rewarding. And this building is worth a lot. It's probably worth more doing it in this format than it would be if we were trying to get market rates.
Well, we have been talking with David Holman of Holman Homes, holmanhomes.com, and that is HOLMANHOMES.com. And David is an out-of-the-box thinker, a forward-looking thinker, a wonderful resource for working with alternative investment assets. Thank you, David, for being with us today. And thank you, enlightened investors, for joining us once again for a very enlightening conversation. Please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe, and head over to your favorite podcast app and leave us a rating and a review. Until next time, live abundantly in all areas of your life, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, Alan.
Enlightened investors, wait, don't go just yet. I just want to remind you about our recently launched webinar that you will not want to miss. If you're at all curious and would like to learn more about how real estate investing can diversify your investment portfolio, alleviate the anxiety associated with Wall Street swings, leverage your 401ks and IRAs to substantially increase the return on your investment, and do all of this with turnkey, hands-off, passive real estate investments, then you'll want to immediately go to stevetalker.com/webinar. In the webinar, we'll also address the common dubious investment schemes that you want to avoid. To access the webinar, go to stevetalker.com/webinar. I look forward to seeing you in the webinar.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Estate Investing Abundance, brought to you by Steve Talker Capital, a company working for passionate professionals like you to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steve Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steve Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. For resources to develop your financial independence, connect with us at stevetalker.com.